Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host, Dusty O'Connell. Joining me, as per usual, useful human, Vikings blogger extraordinaire, Arif Hassan. How you doing, Arif?
I'm good. How are you?
Well, I wish I hadn't had to watch that tire fire of a football game, but, you know.
Fair.
We do as we do here at Norse Code. We are joined this week by FanRag.com writer and NDT Scouting enthusiast. We've dabbled in the NDT Scouting team a little bit before, but this is his first time on the show. He's the Steelers guy for Scout.com as well. His name is Jon Ledward. How you doing, John?
Hey, I'm doing great, guys. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, of course. We are grateful to have you here. Norse Code is sponsored by you, the listener, just like public radio. And I got to tell you, it's been really gratifying to see the outpouring of support and like the increased number of listens as we've had the run up to this season and like week one start to happen. So thank you, all y'all out there, for your support, both listen-wise and dollar-wise, because we pride ourselves on not doing any dumb, like, interstitial ads or, you know, cutaways or anything like that. You know, we're not sponsored by a t-shirt maker or MeUndies. We just make really great content and ask you to support it. And if you would like to support it, then you can throw a few bucks in the tip jar at paypal.me/NorseCode, or, and this is what we would much prefer, you can throw us $1, $2, $3.50, $5, $10, $20, or $100 a month, really any amount you feel like, at patreon.com/NorseCode. And of course, any donation, either a one-time donation of $5 or a recurring Patreon contribution of $5 or more, will get you a sweet, sweet Norse Code bumper sticker. So please contemplate contributing to the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings in these times of trial and trouble. Okay, that was weird.
That was a little weird.
It was going fine until the very end, and I don't know why I picked that sentence to end it, but I don't know. I just got done watching the Texans and the Bengals, like, do you remember the old like vibrating like table football game where you'd like line up all the players and then turn the board on, and then they would just like shake at each other until a bunch of them fell down and the ball went someplace? Like, I feel like that's kind of what we just watched.
It's almost precisely what we watched. Yeah. It also explains the only touchdown of the game, because I feel like that could only happen on like a vibrating football. Like, oh, everybody fell over and the quarterback ran it in. All right.
Yeah. We don't see many 50-yard quarterback runs for touchdowns in the modern NFL.
Yeah, especially when what did Watson run? Like a 4.6?
Yeah, it was pretty good for a quarterback, I feel like, but it was something 4.5, 4.6.
Quarterback, yeah. So, any far-reaching thoughts on the game?
Well, I don't think you will be seeing either of those teams in the playoffs. The Bengals.
Our good friend Ryan Riddle disagrees. He thinks that the Bengals will turn it around, and they were up against one of the best defenses in the NFL.
No way. Did you say that?
He definitely.
They look great.
It's on Twitter. He said it like 10 minutes ago.
Well, they're going to Green Bay in Week 3, so they're going to start the season 0-3, and I think a monumentally small percentage of teams have ever climbed out of that. Although I will say the AFC is pretty much a dumpster fire after the top 3 or 4 maybe teams, so I guess there is a chance, but
yeah, I'm not so sure there's that much. I mean, I think it's 8% after going 0-2, and so monumentally small. I think this is a good estimate for 0-3.
Yeah, probably something. Yeah, less than that. So yeah. And by the way, Deshaun Watson ran a 4.66. So yeah.
All right.
Surprising. Nobody could catch him, I guess. I don't know.
He's just too shifty. That's it.
Yeah, it was the Bengals were on like Thursday Night Football speed. I think that was the problem.
Yeah.
Well, my favorite part of this game, and I was talking to John a little bit about this as I was trying to figure out how Skype works. We got to see both. Well, we got to see all three versions of Andy Dalton: bad Andy Dalton, normal Andy Dalton, and good Andy Dalton, all in the same game.
Oh, did we see Good? I didn't see him.
Yeah, there were like 2 passes.
Yeah, he had one. There was one like extremely Andy Dalton pass in the fourth quarter that was immediately dropped by the receiver.
So that.
He had maybe 0.8 of a second before he released, and he was right on target, but his receiver's hands were apparently holding sticks of butter instead, and consequently nothing happened. But
yeah,
those are
never good.
Those are my takeaways from the game. So we've got you here, John, because you are an ostensible expert on the Steelers, but you are also ostensibly an expert on drafting. And so I wanted to ping you about kind of the question that's been the fuel for hot take artists all around the media for the last few weeks, and that is that the product of the NFL is suffering because of bad quarterbacking, and part of the reason the quarterbacking is bad is because the offensive lines are bad and defensive lines are really good, and it's creating like a mismatch that might lead to like the game being unfixable. Do you have any thoughts or any illumination as far as that goes?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some truth to it, but also we got to start thinking outside the box, because is there a quarterback crisis? You could perhaps say that, but I think more than anything, there's the type of quarterback that's needed to succeed in the NFL is just rare. So the NFL is going to have to alter the way that they do some things. So there's going to be, I mean, we've seen it already. Offenses have not looked good, and defenses are catching up more and more, I think, to where offenses are at. I think it's becoming more difficult for offenses to do some of the things that pro-style type things that you'd like to do. And you saw it, look at what Kansas City did, and that was probably the most impressive offensive performance of the week. And they were using a lot of different concepts in their offense, stylistically changing things up, and lots of different formations, and in much more of a college type feel to their offense. You can define that in several ways, whether it's zone read type of stuff or whatever it might be. I mean, there's lots of different staples that college offenses can use that NFL offenses could adapt, but it just hasn't happened universally. And I think Andy Reid's doing it, and I think that's good. And I think more teams are going to need to do it. Teams that don't have a stud quarterback, and so I think that the NFL is going to have to be more innovative in the way that they think and the style of offense that they use, and probably in the style of quarterback that they use. And I think that could be great for the game, but it could also have some growing pains. And the other thing that I think will happen, is that if we don't see a shift in this, and this next draft class is really heralded. We saw one 2 years ago that was heralded that, Dak Prescott's been impressive. Carson Wentz has flashed. I know Arif might disagree, but and then other than that, that class hasn't really impressed yet. So I think we're seeing there's been some disappointment there.
You put some respect on Jared Goff's name. Did you see what he did?
That's true, actually. He looked like a totally different player last week. So maybe we do have a little bit of hope in that class still. But we'll see how things progress moving forward. But, this next, I think the NFL is going to have to start accepting the fact that it's getting a lot harder to find these types of guys. So what are we going to do to change it? Oh, it just so happens that, there's going to be several legendary classes of backs in a row where you're going to have a ton of talent coming out in the running back position. And I do think in some ways you're already seeing some teams shift back to it, different styles of runners, different styles of ball carriers. We mentioned the Chiefs, they're using a different DeAnthony Thomas in the backfield, Tyreek Hill's in the backfield, Travis freaking Kelce's in the backfield, obviously Kareem Hunt. They're using their players, versatile positionless type players, becoming popular. You see Carolina right now with McCaffrey and Curtis Samuel and Jonathan Stewart. They played a couple snaps all together. I think you're going to see them get really creative as the year goes on. So you're seeing teams take these guys, different types of running backs and skill players, and using them together to create more, they're just trying to get more creative on offense, create mismatches, mess with teams' personnel, and we'll see what all the different concepts that come from it. But I think you're seeing offenses push for that next step in the evolution. And part of that, I think, is going to be versatility. We've messed around with versatility at the wide receiver position sometimes with like smaller slots and then bigger outside receivers. Now bigger slots we're seeing We've seen flex tight ends, whereas blocking tight ends were all the rage, 15 years ago, and now flex tight ends. And now I think you're seeing the evolution of the running back position to several different types of backs. And can you split out wide? Can you play in space? Can you be a flex guy? And how versatile can your usage be? And now what happens if we get 3 backs on the field at once? How do defenses respond personnel wise? And if 2 of these guys can flex out and catch, even better. So it just gives defenses a lot to worry about schematically in terms of how they're going to defend it. And I think we're going to continue to see those types evolutions as the game moves forward.
Wow.
I'm going to push back a little bit on, not on anything that you said, especially the detail, but on just kind of the overall problem. I don't think there's actually that much of a problem. I think that in terms of finding quarterback talent, I think, it would be nice if we can get a rock solid, new generation of quarterbacks. We may already, be seeing that, Mariota, Derek Carr, Jameis Winston, and so on. And so, as like the Peyton Mannings and Tom Brady's and Aaron Rodgers kind of age out, I think we'll probably get, that next group of young quarterbacks, and that, right above them, it's Cam Newton and Russell Wilson and so on. So, and, Andrew Luck, if he survives. I think there's that, but, I was thinking about this question. I saw, I think the Ringer published, like, there's a crisis and so on. And I think that there is a problem with offense. I think we all agree that the offensive line talent in the league is the lowest it's ever been. But at the same time, offenses are scoring more points than ever, except so far in 2017. It's only been 1 week in a bad Thursday night football game. I think 2016, they scored 23 points a game. 2015, they scored 23 points a game. That's the most in NFL history, except for just this random spike in 2013. They have more average net yards per attempt passing. They've got more first downs per game, more yards per game, and even more, yards per rushing attempt than they've had in a long time. And so, there's actually, more offensive playmaking in the last 2 years than we've had in NFL history. We talk about the explosion of the passing offense just last year, and now we're talking about, hey, there's a crisis in the passing offense. I think a lot of it is just kind of a reaction to a lot of the stuff that happened in week 1. And I think it'll bounce back. I think it was just kind of variation. But I do agree that for the NFL to continue evolving forward and taking advantage of the talent that exists in the college game, you're right that they do have to be absolutely innovative. I think that some of the promising quarterbacks from this class are being held back by just really stultifyingly bad head coaches and coordinators. I think we saw a good example of that with Deshaun Watson and the Houston Texans. Not saying that, Deshaun Watson would have looked like, Brady out there with a better coach, but there's clearly a lot of stuff that people were talking about during the game that, would have eased the burden a lot for Watson that they kind of refused to do. Things like rollouts, things like, stressing defenses with different kinds of read options and stuff like that. So I definitely agree that they're going to have to innovate and move forward and stop being so hesitant about some of the college innovations that we have. And, maybe some of those innovations will help also resolve those offensive line problems that we both definitely agree are there.
Yeah.
Because, those are the offenses that the offensive linemen that are coming out are used to playing in, and now they've got to play in NFL-style offenses, which, emphasize tighter, closer spaces and do a lot more to stress offensive tackles and stuff. So I agree on, part of the problem being the offensive line, but I just think that a lot of this is kind of an overreaction to, especially that Ringer was kind of overreaction to week 1.
Yeah, I do think there's some overreaction to week 1. I do think offense, but I feel like, and I don't have a stat to back this up, and maybe you're aware of it, and you can enlighten me more further, but I feel like there is less middle ground than there used to be. I feel like there are just that might be fair, really good offenses, and there's just terrible, can't move the ball, can't function offenses, and I feel like there's less middle ground there. I effectively felt like at the beginning of this season that you could roll out 12 to 15 teams from realistically making the playoffs, largely because of their offensive woes or woes at key positions on offense. And we'll see whether that holds to be true or not. But it just felt like there was less middle ground than there really has been in the league for a while. And I think
you're right about that. Yeah. Like Jared Goff, for example, had the worst season I think in history, relatively speaking, but also just mechanistically, it was the worst season since Ryan Leaf. Brock Osweiler would have been in the running for that if Jared Goff hadn't just stolen the trophy from him. We saw a bunch of other bad passing offenses. I will, put Carson Wentz's Eagles in there. as a good example of a bad passing offense. When he looked, goodish in week 1.
Hey, that's as good as it's going to get from you.
But yeah, I think there's kind of a hollowing out of the middle. Even some of the quarterbacks that we kind of generally put in the middle, your Andy Daltons, your Joe Flacco's, have been really disappointing. And so, yeah, I think that you're right about that for sure.
Well, so here's my question. How much of that is due to the CBA and the relative value for ownership of a rookie contract or a franchise tag versus the cap hit that teams inevitably take when they sign a veteran contract?
That's a really good question. I think the CBA may play some role in sort of the ancillary stuff, like developing offensive linemen, difficult to get, really good practice without contact. But I think that just in terms of quarterback play, I think the league recognizing more and more the importance of quarterbacks is actually killing the ability of the league to surround quarterbacks with talent. Because these low-level quarterbacks, your Mike Glennons are signing for like $15 million, and are crowding out the ability to actually support a game manager. Like if you sign Trent Dilfer, you're signing him knowing that the extra cap room you get can be used to, secure Warren Sapp and Simeon Rice and so on. You can't really do that anymore with these mid-level. I mean, Matt Stafford, he's crowding out the potential for the Lions to grab additional players that can help support Matt Stafford. And in Jim Bob Cooter's offense, he's weirdly kind of a game manager. And so
Brock Osweiler managed to spoil 2 teams cap-wise before eventually landing back in Denver.
Well, one of that was the Browns were like, please spoil our cap. We want the 2nd-round pick. So, it's. But I think that plays a big role. But I think the CBA stuff is kind of like, it's relative to the cast. I don't think it changes the quarterback play, but I think it changes who is helping the quarterback, and namely the offensive lineman, for the worse.
I wish Buffalo had a different head coach the last couple of years, because I feel like there were times where I felt like they were really close to pulling this off. Like having a quarterback that they weren't locked into long term for big money, but a guy who was still I just remember that. I think it was a primetime game. I can't remember what. I hope it was. I don't think it was Thursday Night Football, but it might have been the one good Thursday Night Football game where the Buffalo played Seattle, and I just remember watching Tyrod Taylor in that game and thinking this was the best I've ever seen him play, and I just felt like this was a guy that, if the coaching was just a little better, a little more stability last season, they fired their OC and then had some turnover. But I think Anthony Lynn did a good job, and they were building pieces. They had enough pieces around him. If Watkins could have stayed healthy and if the coaching could have been a little bit better, I feel like Buffalo could have pulled off something close to this. But again, in that division with New England, it probably wouldn't have been enough. But I felt like maybe they could have pulled it off, getting better talent around. But it's hard. It's hard to do, and we'll see if teams can evolve and start to do it a little bit better. Build around something, and you just need a good, competent quarterback. And if you diversify your scheme and your tactics enough, then you don't need to shell out massive money for these guys. But right now, I get it. I get it. If you're Detroit, I do think they need to expand the offense a little bit more. It seemed like they did that in Week 1, so we'll see where Detroit goes with that. But I get it, because I do think Matt Stafford's a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. I don't know if that's a consensus thought or not, but I do think he's in there in that group. But at the same time, they haven't been able to run the ball. That offensive line's banged up now with Taylor Decker, and the defense is pretty pitiful in some spots. So you don't really have a lot to go do anything about all that right now. So yeah, I mean, it compounds the issue for sure. I think it magnifies to me hitting on any of your draft picks or all of your draft picks, because if you can have guys producing that you drafted in the 3rd, 4th, 5th rounds that are on rookie contracts as well, and you don't have to shell out big money for other guys at those spots, that obviously helps a whole lot, as well as New England's approach to, okay, if we have 4 linebackers, but we diversify what they do on the field and break up their assignments in certain ways that best fit their strengths and minimize their weaknesses, we can be successful. And so some combination of those things, I think, are where teams that have been successful in the league have found a way to make it work. But that's why there's only really, if you think about it, probably 6 or 7 teams maybe that you can really see winning the Super Bowl every year, I think.
That's a good point. One final thought before we head into Steelers-specific stuff, and it just crossed my mind. The CBA might actually be, just in terms of rookie contracts, contributing to this, because the more depressed rookie contracts are, the more inflated veteran salaries have to be, because there's a cash floor in the league, and every team with cap room has less negotiating leverage because they can't make the argument that they don't have the resources to sign a veteran. And that might actually be contributing to expanding quarterback salaries. So whereas you have the ability to depress the quarterback salaries of the rookies, you don't have the ability to depress the quarterback salaries of the mid-level vets looking for teams. So I don't know, that's a thought, but that might actually be contributing. Anyway, let's talk about the Steelers.
Yeah, there's a game coming up, Steelers-Vikings.
Yeah, I hear the Steelers are, what's the word, good? Is that
well, you could have fooled me last week, but that is the rumor. They're supposed to be. Last week definitely wasn't a great indication of it, but this is a team that is clearly, there's just not a lot of holes, and the offense has played together now for some time, and so you're talking about an offensive line, really the whole entire offense, other than Martavis not being in the picture last year. They're all returning, everybody that started, and now you add Vance McDonald, you add Martavis Bryant, and you add Juju Smith-Schuster to that list, and another year for Eli Rogers to get better, and you have a top 3 offensive line. If Ben doesn't decline, and really that's the big if Ben doesn't decline, this is probably, you could make a good argument that the Pittsburgh Steelers have the best unit in football in this offense, but they didn't play like it last week against the Browns on the road to start the season. Ben has struggled a little bit more on the road. They look completely out of sorts in all their preseason games to start. They started the game against the Browns looking out of sorts. And so, I think there's too much talent here for them not to figure it out. I think they will figure it out and obviously, take significant steps in the right direction. But yeah, it was a bad performance. There's no way around it. It was bad on just about every level.
Well, so this is going to be the matchup that defines things. The Minnesota Vikings offense looked really exciting against the Saints, but just generally speaking, I don't really trust them to continue to be sort of a top 5 level offense. And so, the Minnesota Vikings offense might end up being average. It might end up being mediocre. There's some really bright spots along the Pittsburgh defense, but, for the most part, I think the Pittsburgh defense is also, kind of not where they're making the money. So the key matchup will be how the Minnesota Vikings defense, which has the potential to be and looked like a top 5 defense, it will fare against the Pittsburgh offense, probably a top 3, top 5 offense. And so the question is, why was there such underperformance against a team that's notorious for being bad? And the thing that kind of struck me is that this underperformance happened at the same time as a pass protection unit. The offensive line was playing well. Big Ben wasn't pressured that much. He was either the least pressured or the second least pressured quarterback in the league in week 1, and there still wasn't that much production. So what do you think was the reason?
It's hard to say, to be honest. The weirdest thing about Ben Roethlisberger struggling on the road is he's 35 years old or something. His struggles on the road the last 2 seasons don't make much sense. How often do you see a player just draw? It isn't the talent around him. They've played well on the road. You know what I mean? It's still been able to move the ball and everything, but for some reason he has not played well on the road. Usually that's like a rookie. You're young, you're rattled in those situations. You're not in a comfortable environment. That doesn't really seem to be the issue with him. Like you said, not under pressure. It's hard to say what's causing these things, and it doesn't even look like really a physical decline. Sometimes it feels like he gets a little bit frustrated, and the chemistry isn't great with anyone not named Antonio Brown. And we saw chemistry issues with Marcus Wheaton. We've seen him with Martavis Bryant in the past. Just not really being on the same page as guys timing-wise, and just weird issues that shouldn't happen. You get to practice with these guys, and so I honestly don't have a great easy answer. I don't know that anyone in Pittsburgh has a great easy answer to why some of those things have happened. Now, he'll still look like Ben at certain points of every game, and in a lot of the time, obviously, because the Steelers have been successful, he's pulled out wins in these situations. But the Steelers have typically had to run the ball very well on the road. They didn't even do that against Cleveland. They didn't even really try and establish the run against Cleveland, and so I wish I had a great answer for why Ben Roethlisberger struggled, especially on the road in some of these situations. Other than maybe being chemistry issues with other guys, but it's not, like you said, he's not under pressure. It doesn't seem like mechanically there's a whole lot breaking down. I think sometimes he does get frustrated, whether it's because of the chemistry issues with other people or the fact that the offense isn't running as smoothly as he'd like, and he starts to force throws and he starts to not maybe move through progressions like he should, lock onto Antonio Brown where he feels a little more comfortable. And so I think some of those things have lent themselves to a little bit of a decline there, but I mean, physically, I don't see a decline in the ability to actually throw the football or even throw with accuracy, at all times. I just think sometimes his process is he rushes himself or gets frustrated, forces things, and gets impatient. And I think all those can have plagued him at times over the last couple of years.
Oh, okay. Well, presumably, if he returns back to form, I'm a little bit curious about sort of how the Vikings will be able to create pressure. I mean, it's a really good offensive line. They have the ability to stonewall some of the best rushers in the league. But if the Vikings just so happen to have some of the best rushers in the league. And so, you've got Everson Griffin, you've got Danielle Hunter. We talked about him earlier in your podcast about how they're potentially, top 15 edge rushers, if not top 10. And there's two of them. And then you've got Brian Robinson backing them up, as well as, maybe the best nose tackle, if not a top 3 nose tackle, along that defensive line. How do you think, this kind of matchup will play out? I mean, everyone knows that Villanueva is really good. You're of the opinion that Marcus Gilbert's a top 3 right tackle in the league, and the evidence seems to point to that. How do you think that plays out against, super athletic defensive ends that both, in my opinion, display a surprising amount of technical ability?
Yeah, it's going to be a battle. There's no question. I mean, just looking at Danielle Hunter and Marcus Gilbert, I think what's given Gilbert issues more than anything in the past is just pure speed rushers, not because of his athletic ability, but sometimes his set points get messed up. Last year, he really didn't give up very much pressure, and I think he only gave up maybe 1 sack. But I think it was to Matt Judon or something like that for the Ravens. It was kind of a random play. It wasn't any. So I don't really, since Munchak got there and Gilbert's really evolved and taken his game to another level, the one player who seemed to give him issues with Elvis Dumervil before he kind of fell off last year and we didn't really hear much about him. But other than that, he really has been remarkably consistent against every type of rusher. But at the same time, you play in the AFC North, and there's not a lot of threatening pass rushers in the AFC North. There just isn't, I mean, Terrell Suggs plays on the other side mostly. He's declining. I think Carlos Dunlap, to be honest, is pretty overrated. He's never really given Gilbert many issues. So and the Browns haven't had any pass rushers to speak of there as well. So, a good chunk of your games every year, you're not facing, that caliber rusher. And when you don't have the AFC West up on the schedule, I think when the Steelers played the Chiefs last year, that was their AFC West team, and they Justin Houston didn't play in that game, and so this will be a good test for him. Is basically what I'm saying. Is he against Danielle Hunter is going to be a good battle for both players. I don't see I don't look at Gilbert and see oh, this is the specific type of player that could definitely beat him. But the thing about Hunter is, and you said he's an athletic freak, but he almost wins more with technique and power than he does with just pure. He's not a pure corner speed guy. He'll go through you. He'll use long arm techniques. He'll swat your hands and bend the edge on you. He's very physical in his approach. And so, Gilbert's going to have to be ready for that technically, because I do think it'll be that battle. Everson Griffin is personally one of my favorite edge rushers in the league because ability to convert speed to power, but then he doesn't just do that. He'll use the speed that, he'll come at you speed, power. And then when you brace yourself for power, he gives you a spin counter back inside. And so that is where I think Villanueva is going to be at a big disadvantage this week, because guys who are that well-rounded that use one move to set up another is consistently, and Everson Griffin probably does that as well as any edge rusher in the league, use one move to set up another one later in the game. That's going to give Villanueva issues, I think, because he is still somewhat new to the position, and as talented as he is, execution can and technique and pad level can sometimes be an issue, and pure power rushers like that do get under. I mean, he's a 6'9" guy. They get under his pads. They walk him back. He does tend to battle back and get hands inside and reset his hips pretty well. But I do think Griffin's going to give him issues. I like Marcus Gilbert against Danielle Hunter. I mean, Hunter's obviously formidable. It's going to be a good test. But I do think Everson Griffin will give Villanueva issues, and I expect that to be an area the Steelers, they have chipped before with Le'Veon Bell, but Griffin is no issue coming inside of you, and it's hard to chip a straight bull rusher unless you're really going to come off your route path. So we'll see how the Steelers handle it. That's going to be one of the matchups to watch, because in my opinion, I would definitely give an edge to Everson Griffin there, especially Villanueva didn't have a great preseason, and he didn't have a great week 1. And so seeing, kind of how his game evolves after coming on strong the second half of last year, then getting paid, and now, hopefully continuing to grow hasn't really happened that way yet. So we'll see if if that rocky start to the season continues for him on Sunday.
Over under sacks 2.5, you think?
Oh man, he's just for Griffin, or you mean for the
no? Just I mean for Big Ben.
Oh. See, you said it, I think, on my podcast. One of the hardest things is then you have to get Big Ben to the ground. And somebody jokingly said it the other day, and I think it's 100% true. It feels like Ben has gotten more like blow the whistle early while he's still standing up sacks than like any quarterback in the league, because like he'll get like wrapped up, but it's like an awkward thing where they're like wrestling in place, and then no one actually takes him to the ground. And so, yeah, no, that is going to be part of it. But he's still slippery elusive in the pocket. It's weird because he's not mobile, but no one would describe him as mobile whatsoever. I mean, Tom Brady honestly probably has more mobility than Ben Roethlisberger, but he's just he's strong and a little bit slippery in the pocket. Good internal clock back there in the pocket.
All right, well, then the next question I think has to do with the running game. Like you mentioned against the Browns, they didn't go to it very often, and when they did go to it, it wasn't very effective. And a lot of that, it seemed like this great pass protection unit wasn't run blocking very well, and that's kind of not a prerequisite for Le'Veon Bell's style, but it really complements his style more than I think it does a lot of other running backs. So what do you think the problems were there, and do you think the Vikings, who seemingly have improved pretty significantly as a run defense unit, can really bottle up Bell to the extent that they need to?
I think the Steelers' offensive line probably got an earful from Mike Munchak this week, and not because they're working pass pro. Like I said, I think Villanueva got beat twice. I don't know that anyone else really allowed any pressure last week. The Browns didn't really have big threats with Myles Garrett out of the lineup in terms of pass rushing, but they didn't generate any movement in the run game, and I do give Cleveland credit. I thought they played pretty well on the inside, and some of their young guys are definitely worth watching there, but it wasn't a good performance for sure for Pittsburgh's offensive line, and they can do a lot more. And I think the scheme can be diversified a lot more too. They just kept pounding inside. Oh, I shouldn't say pounding. I mean, they ran 4 times in the first half, 10 times in the game with Le'Veon Bell, and a couple of those came with the Steelers obviously running out the clock and Cleveland, stacking the box. And Cleveland was playing like way off the ball with their safeties and often playing too high. And so it is partially on Todd Haley as well for not establishing the run more and diversifying the scheme. They didn't run counter with David DeCastro at all. That's like a staple play for them. Sometimes you'll see it 10 times a game when it's working well. And they ran it with Foster twice with good results. It was their best 2 carries of the game. They ran several times, I think, and got penalties on at least 2 or 3 plays, 2 or 3 run plays that were fairly successful too. So that also stunted things a little bit and put them in longer down and distances. So I expect them to hit Minnesota with more outside zone, stretch them out a little bit, and work a little more inside out with the run game approach than they showed against Cleveland. I just think the offense is going to be the Steelers have games like that where they it feels like they can't get off a certain concept. Like they threw 4 bubble screens in a row, because Haley just knew they could hit one, but they weren't executing them. So go to something else and come back to it. But nope, keep pounding away at it. And the Steelers have games like that every year where it's just like they won't get off this one thing offensively. And so I think that they'll take a step back from that approach and it'll be much more balanced this week. But I mean, it's a tough test. I mean, Linval Joseph's an animal. We talked. Tom Johnson's improved as a run defender. If Jaleel Johnson's active for this game, I know the Vikings redshirt they're rookies for a couple games. Usually, it feels like, but I think he can contribute and play right away. I think he's an NFL ready guy. Then you mentioned the 3 edge rushers are really talented. So, I mean, it's a really good group. They're going to have their work cut out for them for sure. I mean, even playing somebody like Baltimore last year down the stretch. The first time they played the Steelers, it looked very similar to Cleveland last week, only with a larger commitment to the run game in that game, and they couldn't get anything going at all. So, and then the second time when they played them later in the year, it was a totally different story. Pittsburgh was really successful running the football, relatively speaking, compared to what everyone else had done against Baltimore. And so I think it'll be a similar type of test. This is one of the best defensive lines you'll face, one of the best run defenses you'll face, and I think by diversifying the scheme a little bit more, you can give Minnesota more to worry about offensively, and I think that or defensively, and that's going to work to Pittsburgh's advantage, I think, because they have the scheme and the talent in enough different places where if they can come with balance and with schematic diversity, then I think you could argue maybe a slight advantage there, although Minnesota, like I said, talented across the board defensively.
Right. Well, okay. So that's actually a really good point. That the Steelers are just so diverse offensively, both in terms schematically as well as from a talent perspective, and that brings up maybe I think the final question of sort of this side of the ball, which is how those receivers, which Eli Rogers was flashed a lot last year, Martavis Bryant's back, and Antonio Brown, arguably and certainly according to you, the best receiver in the league. And he's going to be matching up against probably Xavier Rhodes, for all over most of the game. How do you think that matchup works, given Brown's strengths and weaknesses, Rhodes' strengths and weaknesses, and then just sort of the rest of that receiving core?
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier on my podcast, and I think it's true about Xavier Rhodes, is that this is not maybe the best fit for his style, but I still think he can be successful. Here's the thing. Xavier Rhodes is going to want to be physical with Antonio Brown, I think, in order to eliminate some of that separation quickness that Antonio Brown has, that shifty ability, not let him be the cleanest route runner he can be, and that's what Brown wants to be. The problem is Brown is way more physical and he operates so well despite physicality that it doesn't always work out the way people think it does, because a lot of people think, smaller receiver, if you can just press the guy, if you can just get hands on him. First, Todd Haley schemes really well to keep Antonio Brown clean in his releases. Second, even when that happens, there hasn't been a lot of corners that have been successful against Antonio Brown employing that strategy. And because he does play so well through contact, and he is such a physical, technical receiver in those situations. So I don't think he'll be overmatched in that capacity as much as some other people may think. But Xavier Rhodes is a heck of a corner. So I think that this is going to be a really good matchup. I expect to see Antonio Brown in the slot a decent amount, which will make it interesting because, I think that means Juju Smith-Schuster gets on the field a decent amount with Martavis Bryant on the outsides, because Eli Rogers is pretty much just strictly a slot guy. So how Juju Smith-Schuster plays is going to probably play into this to some degree, and Darius Hayward-Bay if he gets out there as well. But also, how does Xavier Rhodes defend in the slot? You told me earlier he has done that a little bit, and the Vikings do feel comfortable with him in that role, and I would imagine, given their secondary, that he'll be in that role some. But that opens up the full route tree for a receiver, and Brown becomes really, really difficult to defend in those situations. So he does get a little more help in the middle of the field, which is always a good thing. But I still think that when the full route tree is available to Antonio Brown like that, the Steelers are going to be diverse in the way that they employ him in the routes they ask him to run, and that's going to make it a very tough matchup, I think. So definitely one to watch. I like Antonio Brown in just about any matchup with any corner, to be honest, because there haven't been a lot that have really locked him down one-on-one. But Xavier Rhodes is going to be one of the toughest tests he'll face all season.
All right, so then two quick questions before we move on. One, so Antonio Brown, I think, averages 104 yards a game over the past 3 years. What do you think he'll end up in this game? To me, 80 seems pretty reasonable given just how good Rhodes is, how good the defense is in general, but also just that Brown can win in a variety of ways.
Yeah, I think he'll be right around his average, to be honest. But I don't think that'll all be on Xavier Rhodes. Like, one of the things the Pittsburgh will do really well, I think, is that if he's not having success down the field in some of the deeper routes, I think they'll get him the ball in ways that he can make plays with the ball after the catch with the ball in his hands. And he's super, super good that way as well. So he can just hurt you in enough ways that I feel like Pittsburgh will find ways to get him the football in this game. The only way they wouldn't, I think, is if somebody, especially because look at the last game. I mean, no one else stepped up offensively, really. Jesse James in the red zone a little bit. That's not going to continue. So I think that they've got to find ways to get other guys involved. That's part of it. If that happens quickly in this game, then maybe Ben Roethlisberger starts to feel comfortable. If not, Todd Haley is going to know Ben Roethlisberger wants to get the ball to Antonio Brown. He's going to start diversifying ways to force feed the ball into his hands. So it might be 11, 12 catches, but I think he's going to be somewhere around his average.
Jesse James is actually going to be my next question. Because there's the fantasy waiver wire for tight ends is just barren. And so I was wondering, he's still probably available in a lot of leagues. Do you think he's worth a pickup? Not even just a start, just a pickup?
Man, I don't know jack about fantasy football, to be honest. But I mean, I can tell you this about Jesse James. He has not made a combat catch in the red zone as long as I can remember. So that was the first one. So I don't think it's something to hang your hat on just yet with him. But he has a big body in the red zone, and if Martavis doesn't get it going, the Steelers are going to need something like that. So the second one was like a shovel pass deal. So I would imagine Minnesota will be pretty prepared for that. So I'd be surprised if we see something like that again. So, I mean, it's possible. He got a couple touchdowns last year too. He just being his natural scientific size helps. But I don't know that I would.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I don't know how to hang my hat on him.
All right, other side of the ball. Thing that sticks out the most is the 7 sacks that Deshaun Kaiser suffered from, and I put it that way because, no offense, I don't want to give the Pittsburgh Steelers too much credit for those sacks. It felt like most of them were just on Kaiser. What do you think the Pittsburgh does in terms of pressure packages that could really complicate things for the Vikings? I know that we think of the Pittsburgh Steelers, we think of Dick LeBeau, we think of the zone blitz. Feels like the last 2 years they've gone away from sort of the zone blitz stuff and have moved to not more traditional, but stuff that you see out of other 3-4 defenses in terms of pressure.
Yeah, they'll still do that, cross dog, double A gap blitz a little bit, and they'll still do some things like that. In the past, they brought Lawrence Timmons off the edge some, but he's not there anymore. They have in preseason at least lined up with Vince Williams, I think, on the edge, and Shazier maybe even a little bit too. But I don't expect to see that happen. I honestly think that they're going to see, especially if Bud Dupree plays, and he's questionable right now, and he didn't play last week. But I think they're going to see what they can accomplish with 4 rushers. They bring a lot of corner blitzes. They'll bring Mike Mitchell on a blitz. They'll often send him behind a linebacker on a blitz, so that, and they'll drop the away side outside linebacker opposite of the blitz. And so, yeah, I think that they'll definitely, you'll see some of that. But I think Pittsburgh, ideally, if they have their druthers, I think they'd love to see, okay, can we drop 8 and can we drop 7 and can we win with Bud Dupree and TJ Watt on the edge 1v1 and maybe Cameron Hayward inside. And I don't expect Stephon Tuitt to play in this game. I think he didn't practice at all today, and I think it would be probably pretty surprising to see him play in this game. But and I think another thing is getting Javon Hargrave on the field more. He had 25 snaps in the last game, and he was frankly dominant in those snaps. He was fantastic. So can the Steelers get him on the field more? While Tyson Alualu's playing 54 snaps, can we cut down on that? Even though Alualu's played well, he's not Hargrave, not against the run or against the pass, and Hargrave has the versatility to play anywhere on the defensive line and in any situation. So I don't understand. He needs to be out there more. I think that will help immensely as well. But yeah, to me, those are probably the keys. Can you generate pressure with 4 guys, and then obviously the Steelers they have a pretty deep array of blitz packages. I do think you're right though. Kaiser held the ball a lot. 7 sacks is. If 7 sacks occur, you're either the Texans' offensive line or your quarterback held the ball too long. And so I think the Browns have a pretty decent offensive line, and I think a lot of those were on Kaiser. The Steelers have high motor athletes up front. That's the thing. Like, none of those guys stop for a second. So if your quarterback holds the ball or tries to get to a further progression or anything like that, those guys are going to be in your face.
So then my next question has to do specifically with those edge rushers, TJ Watt, Bud Dupree. Bud Dupree, I've never been a huge fan of.
Same.
Yeah. Well, okay, fair enough then. Yeah. And I've always been critical of his ability to turn the corner. I know you've talked about that specifically, because he'll always get past the offensive tackle and then not do anything about it.
Right.
But TJ Watt is super intriguing. I was neither too high or too low on him. I was like, whatever, in a pretty standard edge rusher class. But he kind of balled out. So how do you think TJ Watt matches up against the offensive line? If I'm thinking correctly, he'll be up against Mike Remmers for most of the game.
Yeah. Wait, is Remmers playing left?
No, he's playing right. So
right.
Is it the other?
So Remmers will be against Bud Dupree.
Oh, then no worries.
Yeah. Watt's been exclusively on the right side right now. So.
Oh, okay. So then Riley Reif, who ended up having somewhat of a career game against. Alex Okafor, but still, pretty good game.
But it's like the money matchup, right? Like Reif versus Watt.
Yeah. That's exciting. What do you think about that?
Here's my thoughts on TJ Watt. Coming out, I was like, when I first watched him on tape was Wisconsin, I was like, this is probably like an early day 3 player. who I think can develop and he can give you something against the run right away. He doesn't seem very explosive, and he doesn't really show bend. He does have pretty good change of direction. It was like a weird array of athletic traits. Like I thought he was an athlete, but I didn't think he was like pass rush athleticism was great. Like the ability to be flexible and bend the corner, and the ability to get off the ball extremely quickly.
He's a guy that you might have converted to like off the ball.
Sure, yeah. You could have convinced me of that, or convinced me to play on the edge. He could have had a versatile role to me, especially because he was like 15 pounds lighter than he is now. So it was like, I'm not really sure what his best spot would be, but I could have seen him playing off the ball too. And he in Pittsburgh will drop like that faux 4-3 look, and they will drop him off the ball at times. So there is some of that. But the thing about Watt is that he is a good athlete in certain ways, but he still doesn't really have elite pass rush athleticism. By that I mean he's not super explosive off the line of scrimmage, not like Bud Dupree is. And he does have better bend than I thought he would show, but he's a good enough athlete in other ways in his change of direction to be able to come back inside, in his little stop-start quickness up the arc once he gets going. So he is crafty, I would say. And but the most impressive thing is technically he only had like one move at Wisconsin. It was like a push-pull. That's like all he did. And like if your go-to move in the NFL is a push-pull, like you're just not going to be very successful because you're just not going to get that move that many times on offensive linemen. But now, I've seen him. He's got a rip move. He's got a spin counter move that he used to get a sack in the game against Cleveland. He uses his hands extremely well. He'll convert speed to power. He doesn't necessarily get a massive push right now, but he even showed the ability to corner. He didn't corner a lot at Wisconsin. So coming out, I kind of ended up in a spot where if TJ Watt peaks, whenever that happens, it's like he has a really nice skill set. Like he could be a really good player. But it was like, he's only played defense for 2 years. How much do I want to bet on this? Do I want to take him with a first-round pick? But then again, it was like, this guy's a Watt. His work ethic is like through the roof. His motor never, all the cliche stuff, the grid and the motor. But it's all true, too, and it does matter when you move like TJ Watt does. It does matter. So I was like, do you really want to bet against this guy reaching his ceiling? So that's why it was kind of like hard to be critical of the pick, even though I didn't think he would be this impactful as a pass rusher early on. So I've been impressed with what he's shown, to be honest, so far. Even in the preseason, he's already exceeded my expectations for where he'll be as a rookie. So Riley Reif's a good player, though. I think he's a better player than people kind of give him credit for. Minnesota picked him up, and I think he did play mostly. I don't know. He played both sides in Detroit. He was playing right tackle last year,
right tackle last year, and then left tackle, I think, for every year besides that, maybe rookie year right tackle too, but most of the time he's left tackle.
Yeah, so I think that'll be a good match because Reif's like a technician, but not like a super athlete. And I think, to be honest, at this point, I never thought I'd say this, but I feel like Watt is more technician, right now than he is like he's not like how Bud Dupree was, just trying to like outrun you up the arc. That's not TJ Watt. He's going to try and work a variety of moves on you. So, two technicians battling each other. Reif is, I think, bigger than Joe Thomas. I don't know. I just feel that way. I don't know that that's actually true, but he looks bigger anyway, 6'6", 311. So I feel like that may be a little bit of a challenge, but I also feel like Reif doesn't play with as good a pad level. So maybe TJ Watt breaks out some power moves. We'll see. That's definitely one to watch. Minnesota's got to win that matchup, I think, because I do think Bud Dupree has gotten a lot better. He's worked with Chuck Smith. Mm-hmm. He looked a lot better in the preseason. He looked like he's final. I mean, there's actually counter moves. He didn't know what football really was when he came out of Kentucky. Right. He was completely lost. So he had to start from like square one to get to where he is. So I think if he's healthy, that those two matchups, you're going to find out, I think, how good Minnesota's tackles are.
Yeah, that's right. That's kind of going into the game. I think a lot of fans are trying to figure out, like, well, maybe this game will help us like actually determine sort of the state of Minnesota's offense because, the New Orleans defense wasn't really going to provide them with that. And so, I think that this might do a pretty decent job of that. A lot of that has to do with sort of the talent along the defensive line. It kind of sucks from an evaluation perspective, and for Pittsburgh's side, that Stephon Tuitt's probably not going to play. But Javon Hargrave, Cameron Hayward, they're pretty good. So that's going to provide some level of competition, especially for running the ball up the middle. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on the inside linebackers. We'll talk about the secondary in a second because that's a good matchup for Minnesota, I think. But the linebackers kind of intrigue me because I don't actually know what to think of those linebackers. I've always thought that Shazier has never played up to his potential, and I still think that he hasn't, but he's had some pretty good individual games. But I don't know that he's played all that well given sort of where he was drafted. And then Vince Williams, I don't know very much about. So as linebackers, what do you think about the two of them?
So Shazier is the perception around Shazier is all one way or the other. You either know that he can be one of the better defensive players in the league, which I 100% believe he can be, or you see like the times where he like flashes by a guy he should tackle and doesn't really break down and wrap up, or like the fact that he's banged up and hurt and consistently on and off the field. And typically when he comes back, his first 2 games back or so have been like really rough. Kind of similar to Ben Roethlisberger. When he comes back from injury, he almost always plays poorly in his first game back. That's kind of like Ryan Shazier on the defensive side for Pittsburgh. But when he's healthy and he's out there, he's like he's like the exact type of player that Pittsburgh's pursued heavily, these high variance guys, because Shazier will make like 2 plays that make you want to just scream and pull your hair out. And then he'll make like just incredible plays, whether it's gap shooting, anticipation plays, beating blockers to spots, huge hits. He forces turnovers. That's one of the biggest things. He forces turnovers consistently, and you don't always get that at the linebacker position. I think end of last year he had 4 interceptions in their last 4 games or something like that before the Patriots game. So he consistently does those things at a really high level. He is able to match up. Last year when they played, I believe it was Washington, week 1. He was able to match up with Jordan Reed down the field on vertical routes, and he raced him for a lot of the game, and he didn't throw in his direction because Shazier was on him. So he's able to do really unique things at the position that make him a really special talent, which is why I think the process behind drafting him in the first round was really sound. And he's had monster games before. I mean, like you mentioned it. I mean, his game against San Francisco a couple years ago when the Steelers blew out San Francisco, Kaepernick was still there and some of the other guys that they had on that offense, and he was absolutely everywhere. It was one of the best games I've ever seen by a linebacker. Just at all phases, coverage, ability to spy on the quarterback and make plays in space against the runner of Kaepernick's ability, and ability to make plays against the run and force turnovers. He was I think he had like 5 tackles for loss. He has special ability, but it is about channeling it consistently. Sometimes he'll take risks he shouldn't. He doesn't break down and tackle like he should. He's pretty good in coverage. He's gotten much more consistent in coverage. His rookie year was a little up and down. So I think he is a really good player. But the problem is, can he stay healthy and can he be more consistent when he's on the field? Because I think those are the big concerns. Vince Williams is kind of like a little bit of just a guy, but like a hard hitting, worked his way to get here, sixth rounder that couldn't really be cut ever, and just has worked and worked and worked. Special teams ace, super smart guy, always at practice. He never once takes a play off, anything like that. He's a lot of those cliches as well. Very vocal football player, will talk a lot of trash. Not a very big guy. He does have some hitting power though, because of the way that he plays and how fast he plays at times. I think he doesn't play as quick as Shazier though. Like Shazier wants to fire on like every play. He hardly ever gets caught at the second level just watching. So I think Vince Williams does play it a little bit safer, but does still like to play downhill. And he's a good tackler, very confident short tackler. I think in coverage is where you've got issues with him. Just against Cleveland, there was an issue. He had like a middle zone drop, like a hook zone drop, and he got drawn out to the flat by a flat route, and they ran a slant in behind him. And I think the ball was dropped, but it would have been a first down on like a 3rd and 12 or something like that. And so, when you're in those zone coverages, you have to be assignment sound. You can always rally to the football for in the flat on a 3rd and 12. You can't give up the deep slant on the 3rd and 12. So that kind of stuff, it's not so much a mental issue, just so much as he wants to be aggressive and go smash someone in the face every time that he's on the field. And sometimes he doesn't think, assignments, you have to be executed first. And that was a consistent issue in preseason too. So I think you will get him to bite it a couple times with some concepts. But yeah, I think he's a good football player. I would expect Pittsburgh to get him off the field a little bit on passing downs, and they have run a little bit more dime and got him off the field because he isn't the athlete. He isn't close to the athlete that Shazier is.
All right, well, let's talk about the secondary a little bit, because like I said, I think this is a pretty good matchup for Minnesota. Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen are making their cases to crack the top 10, either or both of them in terms of receiver. Right now, it seems like they're both probably top 15 receivers. I don't know. But certainly, I don't think that the Pittsburgh secondary matches up. You've got a couple of guys who were really, really good in 2013. William Gay, Mike Mitchell, Joe Hayden. And then you've got a couple of guys that are pretty young. Artie Burns, I didn't like the pick. I didn't really believe in him. Sean Davis, who I kind of wanted Minnesota to get, former Stephon Diggs teammate at Maryland. He's going to be kind of interesting. I want to know a little bit more about him. But just generally speaking, you see Joe Hayden, you see Artie Burns. How do you think they match up to players like Thielen and Diggs?
First, let me say Mike Mitchell is still a very good football player. He was in 20. I don't remember if he was in 2013, to be honest. He might have been with Carolina in 2013. But he is a very good football player. The other guys I can get on board with, but Mike Mitchell's a very good football player and a better football player than people realize, I think, because
fair enough.
You don't and if you watch him on all 22, I think you see a lot of the plays that he takes away that offenses don't. Pittsburgh hasn't given up a ton of big plays, especially between the numbers. And he plays a lot of single high, and there aren't a lot of guys that can be trusted to play single high in the NFL today. I mean, it's almost an epidemic how few guys there are in that role, and Mitchell plays it really, really well. The problem is he isn't a big turnover guy. I mean, he forces them with hits a lot of the time, but he isn't a big ball skills, ball hawk type of player. So because of that, I think those types of players tend to get a lot more attention. Because of that, he doesn't really get the attention he deserves. But he's a really, really good football player, very assignment sound, and will come down and play the run in the alley from a single high position in space, which is really, really tough to do. But outside of that, Joe Hayden clearly can't run like he used to. I think he is instinctive, and I think he does have good ball skills and good route recognition ability when the ball's in front of him. But the Vikings are going to be able to beat him down the field. If you get the opportunity and you set it up right, you're going to be able to beat him vertically. Artie Burns bites on stuff in front of him. I was with you. I hated this pick. Actually, I could get on board with the Bud Dupree pick because I thought at least there was the upside to be like really good there. If he ever figured it all out. He was like a late second rounder for me. Burns was like a third round pick for me, third round grade for me. And so, I hated this pick. But he was up and down as a rookie. There were some good flashes, but he will just fall apart at times in the game. Like that, and I think that's the biggest thing. It's exactly what I saw on tape in Miami. He would make a couple really good plays, but then he would just, his technique, everything would go to crap. And it would just, it was like, it's honestly like it's in his head or something, but he can't stay focused. I don't know exactly what it is, but you can see him at times like on the field, like talking to himself and like hitting himself in the helmet. Like there's just a lot going on upstairs for him trying to like process, and I think sometimes he gets upset with himself, and I don't know all that it is. And there are days in practice where he's like right in Antonio Brown's face, and like the two of them are challenging each other. And then there's other days where, man, it just felt like he was getting just abused. And so he has to be more consistent across the board. His press technique will just fall apart. He won't be able to find the football in the air, and he'll just turn and face guard and play through the receiver. He'll bite on stuff and lose his assignment. The Browns got him last year with a double move with Terrell Pryor. The Dolphins got him with a post wheel concept. The Ravens got him on their first drive of the game and the second time they played Pittsburgh. And Mike Mitchell came over from single high and saved his butt, almost picked the ball off. So he has to be a lot more technical. He has to be a lot smarter. I think, but I think he's another guy you can take advantage of for sure. I think William Gay's lost a step in the slot. I think Mike Hilton maybe could be an upgrade there. We'll see. He hasn't played enough for me to really know. He looked really good in the preseason. And Sean Davis is a player I was really high on coming out. I love the pick in the second round. He's very good against the run. He fills quickly. Athletically and size-wise, everything you want is there. It's just about learning him. Like, can he learn his landmarks as a safety, when to get off his mark and to get off the hash and to close on corner routes and things like that. Those are the things he has to work on in deep coverage. But as an athlete and as a physical football player, as a run supporter, as a guy who can play in the box, he does a lot of things really well. So that's kind of your quick rundown of the Steelers secondary.
So knowing what you know about Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen, how do you think that the two of them specifically match up, with these sets of receivers? Because you mentioned the way that you talk about Joe Hayden and Artie Burns, it feels like they're kind of the opposite players, right? Because Artie Burns super fast. That was kind of his calling card, kind of like Trey Waynes. And like you said, he kind of gets lost in himself. And I feel like against receivers like, Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs, that's particularly dangerous, more so than, with Des Bryant, who's, better than the two of them. But, right. He's not as likely, I think, to want to use route running to create separation, much more like win at the catch point. Whereas Joe Hayden, I feel like, Diggs and Thielen are both adequately athletic to take advantage of what he can do. It just feels like, given what the strengths and skill sets that they have are, that it doesn't look like it's going to be a good day with those two corners specifically.
Yeah, no, I would tend to agree. Yeah, if the Steelers don't get a pass rush, this could be a long day for the corners. Because not that I even think Pittsburgh's corners are terrible or anything like that, but I think Minnesota's probably is an underrated receiving core. And we mentioned if a third guy can ever step up there, I think that that could be a really, really strong group. Looking at you, Laquan Treadwell.
He will in 3 games. No, it's not about Laquan. It's about the suspended guy.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Michael Floyd returns. That's when the
savior.
The savior. But I think you're right. I think that Stephon Diggs as a route runner is going to challenge Artie Burns' discipline and technique and footwork a lot. And he can't let things fall apart. Like if Diggs gets him once, okay, but then you got to come back and make the next play. And I feel like things unravel for Burns when they go downhill. Like they really unravel. So that's going to be the key, I think. Can he avoid those types of situations? But how Joe Hayden does, I'm not really sure. I need to see a little bit more Joe Hayden. I didn't feel like he was really tested a ton in Cleveland, other than seeing that he just isn't that fast anymore. If you're talking about that, but I do think, they tried to get him with a double move. I'm trying to remember who it was, and he played it well. Like he stayed off. He got out of his pedal, but he didn't like break hard on it, and then he was able to get back and flip his hips around and play it vertically. So I do think he's obviously smarter than Burns and more experienced player. So I think he could have a better day, but again, it could just be an issue of pure speed, and Diggs isn't slow either. So that could be an issue on the outside as well. So I think Artie Burns could have a tough time, especially if he shadows Diggs all around the field.
It sucks that Adrian Peterson killed William Gay in 2009.
Did you see William Gay made a joke about that recently?
Oh, wait, no, really?
Somebody was like, somebody said, Gay with a strong ankle tackle or something like that, and he like quote tweeted and was like, I learned in 2000 whatever 2000 what did you say it was 2009 or something. He was like, when Adrian Peterson killed me, that wasn't the route to go anymore. I was like, that's well played.
That's good. All right. Well, I think that's kind of most of it in terms of the rundown. Let's get a couple of thoughts on. So we know that, just generally speaking, the Vegas public favors the Steelers. Sounds like it's about 5.5 points now. It opened at 7 after the Steelers won, and it moved after the Vikings won. But the experts are generally speaking taking the Steelers. How do you evaluate? What's your score prediction?
I think Minnesota's going to win. I don't know if I have an exact score, but I think they're going to win. But I don't even think it's that big of a deal. I don't think that Pittsburgh would be in trouble if they lose. I think Minnesota's really good. I had a heck of a time picking wildcard teams. The only wildcard team in the AFC or the NFC that I was able to easily pick was Minnesota. Because and that is, I think they could win the NFC North too. Not to say that they can't win it, but
this is exactly what Justin Mosqueda said.
Yeah,
trolling us last season. Just saying. If you really believe that the Steelers are going to win, then just say it. You don't have to.
No, I think Minnesota can get it done. I mean, I think that this is a really good football team, and I think they're going to present Pittsburgh with challenges up front. In that offensive line, they didn't play as well as they could, and I think they will play better moving forward. But this is a tough one. You haven't had Le'Veon Bell there the whole time, and I know that can be overblown, but when you play opponent of this caliber, it makes a big difference, I think. And I don't love the way Villanueva's played, and I think Griffin's going to be able to get pressure. And we'll see how Ben playing at home gives me a little bit. If this game were on the road, I would feel really confident picking Minnesota. Playing at home gives me a little bit more confidence for Pittsburgh because Ben has played better there, but I still struggle with the whole logic of this point in his career suddenly just being better at home. That just doesn't make any sense to me. So but it is clearly shown in the splits for quite a while now. So maybe I need to start accepting it, even though I don't understand it. But
yeah, I mean, I've done that with football for a couple of years now. Yeah, it's probably true. I've got no argument. Yeah. All right, well, we got to nail you down on a score prediction. Don't worry, we hold no one accountable to these score predictions.
That's not true. We will.
What's the over under? It's 45 or something like that. I think I said it would be under. I think it'll be 23-20 Minnesota.
That was really close to what I was going to predict. I was going to pick 24-20 for Minnesota. But yeah, I think that I think that the secondary for Pittsburgh is about as much of a problem as it was for the Saints, but Pittsburgh has a much better sort of unit up front than the Saints do, despite Sheldon Rankins and Cameron Jordan. I just think there's overall more quality. So I think that the Minnesota offense is going to be slowed down a little bit more than they were last week, especially being on the road. And so 24, 23 points makes a lot of sense to me. I'll stay with 24-20 because no one wins with score predictions, so I'm not even Price is Righting you. But it'll be super interesting just because of how explosive that offense is and how dynamic the defense is for Minnesota. What do you think, Dusty?
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that the wildly low scores of Week 1 NFL are not a giant aberration and more of a harbinger of things to come.
Uh-oh.
I'm still gonna pick the Vikings to win, but I'm gonna say 19-17.
Look at that. Sounds like it's going to be a missed extra point or a safety somewhere.
Awkward score game.
Love those.
Yeah, those are great.
No, it's going to be an awkward score game for Minnesota, and actually I'll tell you exactly how it happens.
Okay.
We miss an extra point on our first touchdown, but then close the deal at the end.
Blair Walsh still there?
All right, cool it, buddy.
It's a curse now. Kai missed a
do you want to get invited back or
week.
not?
It's got to happen again.
Oh, boy.
So this has been guest Jon Lefevre.
What?
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Okay, but seriously, John,
people have said my last name a lot of different ways before.
That's probably a new one for you, man.
That's a new one, yeah. That's a new one.
John, do you want to stick around for the mailbag? Luckily, a lot of these answers came in line. But, if you want to do some off-topic stuff, we can keep you around for that. Although I know it's much later where you are.
Yeah, it's 1:13 here. I coach football. I've got a game tomorrow, but give me one. Give me one to go out on.
Oh, my gosh.
What about the taco one?
Give me a good one.
This is why Arif and I work well together. Don from Ohio writes in, best toppings you can put on tacos.
First of all, is Don from Ohio's Twitter handle really at Don from Ohio?
Yep.
Yes.
That's awesome. Well done, Don. Well done.
Also not Don, also not from Ohio, but that's a story for a different day.
Best toppings you could put on tacos. Oh, man. Maybe I'm not going to say anything outlandish here, to be honest. I'm a meat, cheese, rice kind of guy. I'll put salsa on it. I hate guacamole. I don't want that on there.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Yeah. No thanks.
You are
I like sour cream.
Oh my gosh.
I don't put anything weird on my tacos.
You definitely. Well, rice is weird.
Lettuce. Oh, is rice weird? Yeah, I'll put rice.
A little weird. It's more burrito-y than taco-y.
Yeah,
but I don't think it's
put it on
that
tacos, burritos, anything. Yeah, I love rice.
All right.
I don't know. I don't have anything weird really that I'd put on there. I don't think. No beans. I'm a no beans. No.
Well, the question isn't weird. The question is best. Like if you could pick the two best toppings for tacos.
Two? Huh. What would you? If you had two, yeah. What would you pick?
The meat's not a topping, right? So the meat's like.
Yeah, the meat doesn't count.
Okay, the meat doesn't count.
Anything that goes into the name of the taco, like a carnitas taco, or like a cabeza taco, or a carne asada taco, or a chicken taco, or whatever. None of that counts. Has to be like something that goes on top.
So I don't know what are in naturally any of those things, but does cheese count as one? Because cheese is a must.
Cheese is one.
Cheese is one.
Do you have a cheese preference? Shredded?
Honestly, I'm not picky about it at all. I would put pretty much any type of cheese on it.
Okay,
I like just about any type of cheese.
All right. All right.
I would probably pick rice. I probably would.
All right.
Yeah.
Low on the vegetation.
I'm pretty boring, and I'm very low on vegetation.
Fair enough.
Well, sorry, that's Arif.
For me, I'm definitely a sour cream guy. I'm definitely a guacamole guy. I'm always worried about overfilling my tacos, so I always skip the rice. But cilantro is super important. So I usually go, sour cream, guacamole, cilantro, and then there has to be something else that kind of cuts it a little bit, so a little bit of lime juice, and then instead of salsa, I put pico.
You're so sophisticated, man. Wow.
That's
an advanced palate.
It's kind of one of the hallmarks of the show is that when we stop talking about football, we start being super snobs about food.
We get like really aggressive with the food takes. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not that snobby about food.
We walked into a giant minefield. This would be good Twitter fodder.
It's okay. I'm not that judgy. Unless you're a pro-turkey advocate, then I'm super judgy. Turkey is a trash meat.
Pro-turkey. Oh.
Yeah.
Turkey's good.
Ooh. That is incorrect. I've now begun to judge you.
Hey, you're just glad. Be glad we didn't. Don from Ohio's other question: what is the best flavored milkshake? Be glad we didn't answer that one because
okay. So what's your answer?
We have to know your answer.
Well, it's probably just chocolate, man. I'm a plain dude. I'm not that sophisticated. I don't have a palate like you do.
Well, don't worry about it. I'm not that sophisticated about milkshakes. Mine's Oreo.
Yeah. Have you ever had an Oreo milkshake?
Oh yeah, chocolate, peanut butter, Oreo. Those are all deadly. Yeah.
Ooh, chocolate peanut butter. I think that's the best secondary answer. I mean, Oreo is still the best, but I think chocolate peanut butter. The problem is
that there's a place around me that does great milkshakes, and they like do them like large sizes. And I'm a large human being, so I like to I'm getting the biggest one. If I'm going all in. Well, the problem is that they make these chocolate peanut butter milkshakes, and they're loaded with peanut butter. Like it's like you just started drinking out of a peanut butter jar. I mean, that's what it's like. So you don't really get enough chocolate in it. So then you just want to go get the chocolate milkshake.
Yeah, that's pretty key. That's fair.
I feel like the secret to a good chocolate peanut butter milkshake is to make just like your basic chocolate milkshake and then blend up Reese's peanut butter cups into it. But you can't use the small ones. It has to be like the regular like candy bar size ones.
Yeah,
like
that's fair. Yeah.
That's the secret to like the perfect chocolate peanut butter milkshake.
Yeah. I can get on board with that for sure.
Yes. But yeah, too much peanut butter ruins everything.
Ruins it. Yep.
All right. Thanks for coming on, man.
Hey, no problem. Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the show.
This has been Jim Foufere from... I'm just kidding. You can read Jon Ledward's work at fanrag.com and scout.com. He also does a couple of podcasts, as I understand. You work with NDT Scouting?
The podcasts are through the Locked On Podcast Network. I do Locked On NFL Draft Podcast 5 days a week with Trevor Sycamore on iTunes and Audio Boom. And then the Locked On Steelers Podcast 3 days a week. I don't know if you're going to have any Steelers fan listening, but Locked On Steelers Podcast 3 days a week, also on Audio Boom and iTunes.
Well, I strongly recommend the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast, by the way.
Oh, good stuff. Well, thank you. Yeah, mostly Trevor, but yeah.
Yeah, I meant Trevor. I mean, you're just a piece of shit, so.
Well, that's well said.
Stay locked on, and thank you so much, Jon, for hanging out with us. Now, go to bed. It's late.
Absolutely. Will do. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Well, that was great.
Yeah, he's good.
He had some soft taco takes.
I mean, I'm not that surprised.
That's punny. Did you get it?
Ooh, I missed it. That was good.
Should we attack the rest of the mail? Well, actually, so just to put a pinpoint on, or put a pin into Don from Ohio, the best taco toppings are pineapple and...
I can only do pineapple if the taco is a carnitas. I can't do it if there's beef of any kind.
Really?
Yeah, it isn't right to me.
Honestly, I feel like especially when you're dealing with unfamiliar meats like lengua or cabeza or whatever, I feel like some pineapple and maybe some like super vinegary hot sauce like Cholula, like specifically not Tabasco or Sriracha Tabasco.
Well, okay, so with both lengua and cabeza, I think vinegary sauce is really important, like you said, not Tabasco. I can't do pineapple with actually either of those either. I kind of want like the fact that you like slow cooked them forever to really stand out, and I think the pineapple is just too strong of a taste. But vinegar will brighten everything up. But I usually just use lime juice for the acid.
All right. I guess to springboard off of Jon's point, I would say that there is a space for crumbly cheese on top of tacos, like queso fresco, like the kind of cheese that won't melt no matter how hard you try to cook it. That
I feel like I have to design my taco around that, but it's good.
You can just sprinkle a little on, just like cilantro or pineapple or pico or whatever. It creates an interesting textural component and adds some needed, like, not meat fat, especially if you're dealing with meats that are not particularly fatty.
Oh, see, because I got the sour cream and the guac going. I don't need that much fat.
Well, it's lucky for John that it was like 4 a.m. on the East Coast or whatever it is, so that I couldn't probe him further about why he hates guacamole. But that's
that's rough. I think I lied to him. I do judge him for the guacamole take too. Sorry, John.
wait till he was gone.
Yeah, I'll DM him. I'll tell him that.
All right. So Mike Raver writes in, Big Ben is good against the blitz. Are we at a disadvantage since our defense's best strength is creating pressure?
I don't think that much. I think that he's good against the blitz, but generally speaking, the reason he's good against the blitz is because he has the ability to exploit holes in coverage. It's not that, he's better than most quarterbacks against pressure, but it's not that he gets better when he's pressured. He just doesn't get as worse as a lot of quarterbacks when pressure is there. And so even though the defense's primary strength is creating pressure, they can still do that without blitzing, or they can do that without creating too many holes in coverage when they do blitz. And so I still think that the way the defense is constructed is fine for attacking the Pittsburgh passing game, such as it is.
Ben Glaseman writes in, is Roethlisberger a DFS play this week?
Probably not. He's generally a pretty expensive DFS player, and I'm sure the values are like really out of whack this week. But I wouldn't do it against a defense that's reputed to be quite good. So I would hold off. I would probably have maximum exposure for Tom Brady, for example. Who I forgot who he's playing. I felt like it was a bad defense. But if I was going to spend on a quarterback, it'd probably be Brady. And if I was going to take some shots, it would be at some of these young quarterbacks where you have no idea what they're going to do.
All right. Hunter McGinnis writes in, who is the hot hand this week? I assume he means as a receiver. My money is on Kyle Rudolph.
Well, after hearing John talk about the strengths and weaknesses of those linebackers, especially Ryan Shazier, being able to cover players like Rudolph downfield, I'm not as excited about the prospect of Rudolph. And knowing how weak that secondary is, I think we're more likely we're gonna see some interesting stuff from Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen. And again, I would just go to Stephon Diggs. I think that neither of them have proven to be consistent from week to week to week in terms of production. But I think Diggs has more tools in his toolbox to be a more consistent player. And certainly Sam seems to trust him. So given how weak that is, I'm just going to go with Stephon Diggs again.
You're not just saying that because of the adorable GIF that you retweeted.
Oh, so cute. No, that's not the reason. Also, that GIF will definitely be in the show notes.
It's glorious. I got to figure out the perfect music track to play underneath it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Also, New England plays New Orleans this week. So,
yeah, play Tom Brady.
Yeah. Tom Brady, who will score 60 points, no matter what your scoring paradigm is for your league. Drunken Vike writes in, Dalvin Cook's running style reminds me of Maurice Jones-Drew. Is it a fair stylistic comparison, or am I a moron?
So this was kind of interesting to me because someone responded to this by saying, no, Maurice Jones-Drew runs with a lot more power than Dalvin Cook does. And I think that Cook has underrated power, but I think that that's true because MJD sought contact. What's interesting is when you remove that from the equation, it's a very important part of his running style. It actually also kind of reminds me of Marshawn Lynch. Again, he's a super powerful runner, and so it's not a very good comparison. But just as runners before we anticipate contact, I feel like the way that Dalvin Cook runs, it's this very fluid. He's not a very stop-start guy. He's constantly kind of in motion, and he creates these awkward tackling angles. Has a lot of really good balance, and plays with remarkable agility that you don't really see in terms of his 3-cone time or anything like that. And it's not because his feet move quickly; it's because his hips are super fluid. And so those are the kinds of running backs that he plays like. It's just he doesn't play with the type of power that those two do. I never really had a very good comparison for Dalvin Cook. For me, the cheap way out was Jamal Charles. But, he's not as fast as Jamal Charles by any reasonable stretch of the imagination, and Charles also had, better stop-start agility than Dalvin Cook did. So that's not a very good comparison at all. But in terms of running style, MJD is not bad, but I think if you're going to remove power from the equation, then Marshawn Lynch is maybe a better comparison, which I think Kareem Hunt is a better Marshawn Lynch comp, just by the by.
Well, that's just because you're like super high on Kareem Hunt. Okay, so... And this was maybe like,
but also like he's got better balance than Dalvin Cook. He does better against contact, and he seeks more power, and he's not as fast. So there's real reasons too.
Okay, so I had this theory when I read this question, and then I read a thing that Eric Thompson, I guess, posted on Twitter. He might have made it into a DN article, but I'm not sure. But it was basically PFF's. Like route stats on Dalvin Cook, and it showed that Cook was like lethal around the edges and around edge linebackers, and maybe not so good up the middle. And it kind of made me think of LaDainian Tomlinson.
Yeah, I don't know if I would go with Tomlinson. Like in terms of where he won, yeah, that makes sense.
So let me fill you in on the backstory, because like. Cook and Tomlinson are both similar kind of like, just when you were talking about how fluid Cook's hips are, Tomlinson is the kind of guy that could either, run the ball on either side of the line, but could also get free and receive a screen and, catch like a 3-4 yard pass. And that seems to me like the kind of moves that are going to be Cook's bread and butter going forward.
So I just Googled Dalvin Cook comp, and I'm not entirely ignoring your point. I just found it super interesting. The 3 comps that come up right away are Edgerrin James, Clinton Portis, the pre-injury Clinton Portis, and Doug Martin, which I don't think the Doug Martin one fits at all.
Is anyone that listens to the podcast old enough to remember those guys?
Well, it's their articles online. People like Lance Zierlein, who definitely remembers Edgerrin James.
I'm just kidding.
Oh my God! And this CBS Sports article, Chris Johnson. What?
All right.
That's just got to be the dreads. That's not fair.
All right. That's egregious.
Yeah. Okay. So the lesson here is that there are no good comps, including LaDainian Tomlinson. I think one of the differences is actually that Tomlinson had better stop-start agility, and then I also think that his long speed enabled him to be more versatile than Cook. Because I think Cook is super versatile, but I think that Tomlinson's a guy that you could just line up at receiver. Whereas Cook is a guy who gets open as a receiver when he's running as a running back out of formation. So, yeah, I think just in terms of pure running style, I think that Tomlinson was much more likely to, and you're right, he was a super smooth runner, but he was much more likely to stop and start, which maybe I'm hanging up on that too much, because maybe Tomlinson's a pretty good comparison, but, I'm a contrarian, I do that.
Get out of my hair. Like, I just got a haircut. Get out of my hair. Okay, but seriously, this kind of goes back to something that we talked about at the very top of the show about how the run game is going to have to evolve to kind of account for all this nonsense with the various weaknesses that, the influences that we talked about are creating in kind of teams. And I mean, I've done my best to beat this point to death, but I feel like the Vikings are in a really good spot to have a 3-headed run attack that exploits a lot of spots where other teams are going to be weak.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm kind of curious about, whether or not the Vikings are ever going to line up McKinnon and Cook on the field at the same time. Kind of curious how much more they're going to trust Latavius Murray. I know Pat Shurmur said today, as of this recording, that they do want to get Murray involved a lot more. I think it's probably fair not to overreact to one fumble, but that'll allow them to pound the middle. I think one of the reasons that Dalvin Cook wasn't that successful at the middle today has more to do with the blocking he had in front of him than it does with his inherent ability, because he definitely did demonstrate an ability to push the pile and create positive yards out of negative yards. So, I think that you're right. The 3-headed running attack creates unique opportunities. You've got Jerick McKinnon potentially lining up in the slot or getting to the outside. You've got, Dalvin, who's a much more patient runner than McKinnon, being able to exploit, kind of small creases that McKinnon can't, and using his speed to stretch the defense into the wrong position, as opposed to McKinnon using the speed to beat the defense to a particular position. And then, Murray's probably, he's a good goal line back, a good pass protector, a good catcher.
All right, so I have one last question for you before we bounce. And that is, like you guys talked a lot during the interview about specific coverages, but what happens to the Vikings if neither Anthony Barr nor Xavier Rhodes play?
Oh, Jesus.
Don't say that.
Rip. Well, I mean, yeah.
Well, no, but you get why I'm saying that, right? Because neither one of them really practiced yesterday as of this recording.
Right. Yeah, I think both will be fine, but that's a good point. They neither of them practice, so it's pretty appropriate to speculate what happens without him. We'll definitely see Tremaine Brock then, who did fully practice the past 2 days, and we'll see probably Terrence Newman, rotating in there with Tremaine Brock and Mackenzie Alexander at different points. But here's the thing: you might end up actually with more Mackenzie Alexander on the outside, where he performed really well for the Vikings last week, and where he performed really well for Clemson, whereas he's been a huge issue in the slot in the preseason and in regular season games last year. So maybe you have Mackenzie Alexander on the outside, Trey Wentz on the other side, and Terrence Newman and Tremaine Brock, trading that nickel spot. Maybe you'll see Tremaine Brock on the outside trading in with Mackenzie Alexander. I don't know. That'd be kind of interesting. But you're going to have a cornerback rotation, and that's a result of not being confident in knowing who you have. And so that wouldn't be a great thing. No matter what happens in that scenario, Antonio Brown's going to go off, maybe not 184 yards, but I think you're on watch for 150. As for Anthony Barr, that's, I don't know, man, because they don't really have the kind of athlete, to replace him. And not that he's easily replaceable, but they had Edmund Robinson last year, and he had the ability to at least demonstrate range, even if his instincts were a huge problem. But now you're kind of asking questions because it can't be Cantrell Brothers, right? And Eric Wilson is too light on his feet. He gets, destroyed. Plus, he's clearly, at the bottom of the depth chart. Yeah, that's tough. Without Anthony Barr, obviously you're playing Ben Gideon a lot more, and I think that's kind of the solution in nickel. In base, you might have Cantrell Brothers inside. That's not ideal at all.
Tough but real. Hopefully that doesn't come to pass. I mean, I don't know. We'll see how the rest of the week plays out before Sunday.
I mean, I guess you end up with Emmanuel Lemur. It's
going to be carousel coverage. They're all going to get a shot and get rotated in as needed, and it's going to. But the answer is, and this is kind of what I was getting, is that no one is going to perform individually as well as Barr would, were he healthy and starting.
Yeah. The more I think about it, the more likely it is Lemur. But yeah.
All right. Well, I'm glad I could put a sour note on the end of episode 194 of Norse Code.
Yeah, it maintains, I think, the overall tradition of the podcast's malaise.
Less miserables. Do you have anything that you would like to plug before we call it a night?
I wrote a piece on the offensive line. I looked at every play. I gift a lot of the negative plays that stuck out to me. People were asking the question, hey, I thought the offensive line played pretty well. Why did Pat Elflin and Nick Easton get such low PFF grades? Is it just because we shouldn't trust PFF, or did they have genuine, performance concerns? And so I wrote a piece about that, and I broke down their play and talked about what those concerns are, which concerns are likely to sustain themselves, and which ones aren't. So that piece is up. I'm hopefully going to have a piece on the various advanced statistics to keep track of for the Vikings up by the time you listen to this podcast, but it might not. I'm usually very bad at following through on that promise, so I won't make it. But yeah, those will both be at zonecoverage.com.
Awesome. So be sure to check that out. Jon Ledward is Ledward NFL Draft on Twitter. We will have links to some of his work in the show notes this week. Please be sure to show up early next week for the recap of this game, and then subsequently later in the week for a preview of next week's game. It's Lions, right?
I think it's the Buccaneers.
Bucs first, yeah. Bucks, then Lions, then Packers, then Browns, where we go to London. Yay! So and excited. It sounds like Eric Thompson might be joining us for the live to tape pod afterward.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we'll have more details on that as we get closer to that event. But in the meantime, keep your podcast dial here and demand excellence. Demand Norse Code. And we'll see you next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, or wherever else fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, who can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. Our intrepid producer and occasional co-host James Pagachnik can be found on Twitter at Big Mono or curating the official Norse Code Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. I'm your host with a firm grasp of the obvious, Dusty O'Connell, and my name is my handle on Twitter. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, your one-time donation can be made at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Please visit our website, NorseCodePodcast.com, where you'll find links to our Facebook and YouTube pages, along with the episode archive and some other good stuff. And any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be emailed to NorseCodePodcast@gmail.com. And on behalf of the entire Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.